Hello and welcome to the week in Parliament. The government loses the Brexit case in the Supreme Court, but seizes the initiative in Parliament.
I can confirm to the House that our plan will be set out in a white paper published this House.
Ministers produce a Brexit bill. MPs complain about a lack of debating time.
I was astonished at the amount of time that the Leader of the House has given this Parliament to debate it.
And doubts over whether Theresa May can stand up to Donald Trump.
How confident is she of getting a good deal for global Britain from a president who wants to put America first, buy American and build a wall between his country and Mexico?
It's been a particularly fast-moving week for Brexit. On Tuesday, the government lost a legal battle over who should authorise starting the formal process for leaving the European Union. The government argued that it could use the royal prerogative, a power left over from the days of medieval monarchs. But the Supreme Court thought otherwise. The President, Lord Neuberger, said it was a task for Parliament.
Today, by a majority of 8-3, the Supreme Court rules that the government cannot trigger Article 50 without an Act of Parliament authorising it to do so.
The government was quick to respond. A few hours later, the Secretary of State for exiting the EU, David Davis, promised to publish a bill seeking Parliament's approval for triggering Article 50. But some MPs wanted to be clear about what they were voting for and asked for a white paper setting out the government's strategy. David Davis batted away their demands.
Will the Secretary of State now agree to accept the unanimous recommendation of the Brexit Select Committee and in the process agree with himself before he got this job and now publish a white paper on the government's objectives so that these can be considered alongside the legislation that he has just announced?
I don't often disagree with myself, but let me say this to the Honourable Gentleman. Right Honourable Gentleman. The speech given last week by the Prime Minister was the clearest exposition of a negotiating strategy I have seen in modern times. It laid out very clearly what we judge the national interest to be, how we intend to protect it, what we want to do, what we hope does not happen, and how we're going to go about avoiding that too.
But on Wednesday, at Prime Minister's questions, there was a surprise change of heart.
I recognise there is an appetite in this House to see that plan set out in a white paper. My honourable friend's question, the question from my honourable friend, the member from Broxtowe, last week, in the same vein. And I can confirm to the House that our plan will be set out in a white paper published this House.
So a lot of activity on Brexit. This is how the SNP's Pete Wishart saw it.
What a week it's going to be. First, there was to be no vote. Now there's a vote. Then there was to be no bill, and now there's a bill. Then there was to be no white paper, now there's to be a white paper. We should have chanced our arm and said there should be definitely staying in the European Union.
The bill paving the way for Article 50 to be triggered was presented to Parliament on Thursday by the Brexit Secretary, David Davis.
Presentation of bill. Mr. Secretary David Davis.
Notification of withdrawal bill.
Second reading, what day?
Tomorrow, Madam
Tomorrow.
Well, here's a copy of the bill. And here to discuss what it means for Parliament are Lord Liz Vane, the former clerk of the House of Commons, who advised MPs on parliamentary procedure and constitutional matters, and Robin Munro, a senior researcher from the Institute for Government. Well, Lord Liz Vane, you've seen many bills come and go during your time as a clerk in the House of Commons. What do you make of this one?
It's a very short bill, which the government is going to want to get through as quickly as possible.
And there's a lot of talk of amendments being made. The opposition are very busy trying to find ways to amend this bill. Could you just explain to us how they are going to go about this? How easy is it to get an amendment discussed in the House of Commons?
You can't have an amendment simply to negate the purpose of the bill. That would be wrecking, and that would be out of order. I think there are two main areas of amendment possible. One is to impose conditions before Article 50 is triggered, and the area of when it's going to come into force. At the moment, there is no commencement provision in the bill. That means it'll come into force when it has royal assent, but it will be perfectly possible to put down amendments to delay that. But The big question is then, what about selection of amendments? And in the Commons, if this goes to Committee of the Whole House, as I assume it will, the person responsible for selecting amendments is the Chairman of Ways and Means. I think one area which is going to be really interesting is those who would like to have a post-negotiation referendum on the deal eventually reached may try and do that by amendment to this bill. But this is such a narrow bill that it may well be decided that that is outside the scope of the bill.
And of course, Robin Monroe, this is not just about procedure for many MPs, this is about the substance of Brexit. And we've been promised a white paper. What do you think ought to be in that white paper to satisfy MPs?
The purpose of the white paper should be to give MPs confidence that the government is ready to start negotiations, that it's thought through that negotiating position and hasn't just come to its negotiations through some other way. So what we might expect to see in that white paper could be a kind of an evidence base, so showing that the government weighed up the costs as well as the opportunities of its different negotiating options. So, for example, if you want to leave the customs union, has it weighed up the costs of that as well as the benefits? Other things we might expect to see in that white paper, and that I imagine MPs would want to see, might be an explanation of how they will be able to scrutinise the negotiations as they proceed. So we've heard, for example, that the government wants MEPs and MPs to have the same level of information about the negotiations. We know that European parliamentarians typically get quite a high level of information. They sometimes have access to private copies of provisional agreements or private briefings with negotiators.
Could that happen for MPs? Could there be access to private documents? Secret
Well,
documents?
there may be, for example, reading rooms put in place in the Palace of Westminster to allow certain MPs access to draft agreements as they're being developed.
What's your assessment of how this is going to go in the Commons?
Well, it'll all depend on the numbers. The government will want to proceed quickly, and indeed, in the explanatory notes to this bill, they've said they're going to fast-track it, and that means, essentially, to begin with, that amendments can be tabled before the second reading debate. Thereafter, it's a matter of how quickly they want to push on with it. It will inevitably be programmed. I think it may be a sensible decision to programme it quite generously.
And that means timetabling?
Timetabled, exactly. There's timetabling in the Commons, but there isn't in the Lords. And a generous programme would allow really quite a wide expression of views, and that might draw some of the difficulty out of considering the bill in the Commons.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the Lords. You are, of course, a member of the House of Lords, where there is no timetabling. The Lords can talk about any amendment for as long as they like. Do you think actually the government's going to have much more difficulty in the House of Lords?
It may be that the government has to work a bit harder presenting its case because there are so many ramifications of this, even though the bill is so short. But it was interesting that when David Davis's statement was repeated in the Lords the day before yesterday, how many members said, look, the Lords mustn't be silly about this because the Commons is the elected House. The Lords can ask the Commons to think again, but it would be difficult, I think, after a lengthy consideration in the Commons to identify areas where it would be reasonable to ask the Commons to think again.
So you're confident the Lords isn't going to be silly?
I very much hope the Lords is not going to be silly.
Are you confident? Do you see a kind of revival of Parliament during the Brexit process? Is this a great opportunity for Parliament here?
I think it is really heartening to see that Parliament is going to be involved from the very beginning, but also having a vote on the final deal at the end. But I think the other thing to say about the involvement of Parliament is it's not just an opportunity for MPs to get their voices heard. It's a chance for lots of other external voices, whether that's the public, the third sector, businesses, to use Parliament as a kind of a channel to get their voices heard in these negotiations.
And Lord Lisvane, are we going to see some golden years for Parliament now?
Well, I agree with everything that Robin said, but I think also it's an odd thing to say, but Parliament thrives on uncertainty. If things are actually being decided in the two chambers and you can't predict, and some of the questions you've asked indicate that people really can't predict what's happening and will not be able to predict what's happening over the next 2 years. So if Parliament can position itself so that it is taking a central part in that process, then yes, it will be a very good time for Parliament.
Lord Lisvane, Robin Monroe, thank you very much. The government has announced the timetable for debating the Brexit bill. There'll be 2 days for the second reading and 3 days for detailed scrutiny, called the committee stage, when amendments can be made. Some Labour MPs don't think that's enough.
I was astonished at the amount of time that the Leader of the House has given this Parliament to debate it. And he's being very coy about whether the White Paper will be published before the committee stage of the bill. Can he give us more time and tell us he's going to publish the White Paper before next week?
I think if you consider that this is a two-clause bill, which the second clause is dealing only with the extent of the bill to the United Kingdom, there is plenty of time, including 2 full days at second reading, for all opinions to be fully expressed.
As we discussed earlier, the government could find things rather more challenging in the House of Lords. Here's a taste of what's to come.
We will therefore be seeking to amend the bill to provide for a referendum to be held when we know the terms which the government has been able to negotiate. The government may have a mandate to start Brexit negotiations. It certainly does not have a mandate to impose harsh Brexit terms on the country.
Does my noble friend accept that if the Parliament accepted the advice of the noble Lord Harris and treated the referendum as advisory and decided that this country should not leave the EU, there'd be no option for those of us who were in the majority and voted to leave other than to take to the streets and probably start breaking things?
Well, my lords, all I can simply say is that I very much hope that this does not happen, and I'm sure that there is, considering the comments made so far by your lordships and the very constructive approach that the noble Baroness Hayter has been making through this process, that we will avoid that.
The Prime Minister, Theresa May, is one of the first foreign leaders to meet Donald Trump. In a speech during her trip to the United States, she said the UK and US could not return to what she called failed military interventions to remake the world in our own image. But she also said they should not stand idly by when the threat is real. Donald Trump has made a series of controversial policy statements during his first week as president, including saying that waterboarding, a form of torture, absolutely works. Before her visit, Theresa May insisted that she too would speak her mind.
I'm pleased that I am able to meet President Trump so early in his administration. That is a sign of the strength of the special relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States of America, a special relationship on which he and I intend to build. But can I also say to the Leader of the Opposition, I am not afraid to speak frankly to a President of the United States. I am able to do that because we have that special relationship, a special relationship that he would never have with the United States.
Mr. Speaker, we would never allow Britain to be sold off on the cheap. How confident is she of getting a good deal for global Britain from a president who wants to put America first, buy American, and build a wall between his country and Mexico?
The Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson was also quizzed by a Lords committee on the UK's relationship with the United States. Boris Johnson chose his words carefully.
Do you think it's acceptable under international obligations shared by the UK and the US to have a ban on refugees from certain Middle East countries?
I don't want to disappoint the committee by retreating too much into this formula, but we haven't yet seen the legislation brought forward. Rather than get into some sort of hypothetical dispute, let's see exactly what the proposals are.
President Trump's been very clear that he wants to eliminate radical Islamic militancy from the face of the earth, and he's also been clear that he's prepared to have a new approach to prioritise the defeat of ISIS, possibly in cooperation with Russia. Would you support a change of US-UK direction in that to support those goals, possibly even joining forces figuratively and militarily with Russia to do so?
We are already, with the United States, engaged very heavily in attacking Daesh in Iraq. The committee will know that we are more than 1,000 sorties have been flown. I think almost 1,200. We're there.
Are you prepared to see an alliance of forces, including Russia, attack Daesh?
To switch sides, to come in on the side of Assad and the Russians would be seen I think, as a great betrayal of the people of Syria who have opposed Assad. It would be seen as a betrayal of the moderate armed opposition that we have supported, and it would be it would have grave repercussions in the area.
This week sees a centenary of a report which helped pave the way for votes for women. At a Speakers' Conference in 1917, the issue was debated and resolutions were sent to the Prime Minister, Lloyd George. As an exhibition in Parliament reveals, the key vote proved to be a close one. Here's Ros Ball.
Britain during the First World War. With men sent to the front, women did the jobs they left behind. And an exhibition in Parliament shows how, as the war dragged on, their contribution forced MPs and peers to address the issue of electoral reform.
It's often forgotten that 40% of men couldn't vote before 1918. And of course here they were in the middle of the war, fighting and dying all over the world. And it wasn't politically acceptable to have the next general election on that basis. So they had to give the vote to more men. And because women had also been playing a very major part in the war effort, they had to at least discuss whether they should give it to some women as well.
MPs and peers debated the issue in a cross-party conference in January 1917. It was Liberal MP Willoughby Dickinson who came up with the key compromise, as his great-granddaughter recalls.
They voted down various options, and the final one, and you can see it in one of the screens down here, where he says, I made my proposition, which was that women of a certain age, which was 30, were to get it, which only won by, I think, 9 votes to 8.
The resolutions fed into the Act of 1918, which gave the vote to women aged 30 and over with a property qualification.
Since one of my great causes is women in Parliament and having more of them, because we're not very good at it in this country and we're particularly bad at it in the Conservative Party, it's wonderful for me to have this extraordinary heritage, both through my grandmother and through her father, Sir Willoughby.
And you can see more of the Vote 100 exhibition online at the parliament.uk website. Now for a quick roundup of a few other stories in Westminster. There was an unusual moment at the Brexit Committee after the Chief Minister of Gibraltar made some impassioned remarks about the historic links between the people of Gibraltar and the UK.
We are born British. That rock is red, white and blue for us. There is nothing else that we have known. The system of government that we know, the system of education that we know, the makeup of my understanding of the world is British. How can I suddenly now do something else? I can speak fluent conversational Spanish, but I don't speak professional or political Spanish in the way that I might be expected to should I need to navigate the waters of the Spanish system. You look at the Spanish political system today, it doesn't have much to commend it to the people of the world. I mean, the British system, we criticize ourselves so constantly and so constructively that we make it stronger. That's the system that we believe in. That's the rule of law that we believe in. The Supreme Court that ruled yesterday and that everybody respects the views of. That is what makes up the Gibraltarian. My blood is red, but I'm red, white and blue inside out. And so is that rock, and we will never, ever countenance changing that.
That was a most passionate
Come and see for yourself.
And eloquent answer.
Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, was back in Parliament to talk about his role as the UN's global envoy for education.
I was in a village just outside Juba, and there was this BRAC project, the Bangladesh group who do these small huts at schools. So there were places in that school for only about 20 kids. And I remember being in that hut, and there was a small portal, and looking in on that portal were about 100 kids who were unable to get the education they want. And there was a mother who told me she had to choose between one of her twins at 8 years old, which went to school.
And the Wales Bill came to the end of a rather turbulent journey through Parliament. The former Welsh Secretary, the Conservative Stephen Crabb, was a driving force behind the legislation.
The original objectives, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we sought to set out right at the start haven't changed. What we wanted to do was create a stronger devolution settlement for Wales, a clearer devolution settlement to try to end some of this constant argument that resulted in the UK government and Welsh government trotting off to the Supreme Court to argue about which administration is responsible for which aspect of policy. It was absolutely ridiculous.
But he didn't think it was the end of the book, as he put it, on Welsh devolution.
But I think that we do need a prolonged period now where Welsh Government actually learns to really deploy its powers and uses its competences in a way that benefits the people of Wales.
At the start of the week, the Defence Secretary, Sir Michael Fallon, was summoned to the Commons to answer questions about newspaper reports of an unarmed Trident missile going off course during a test launch. Sir Michael refused to give much away.
In June last year, the Royal Navy conducted a demonstration and shakedown operation designed to certify HMS Vengeance and her crew prior to their return to operations. This included a routine unarmed Trident missile test launch. Contrary to reports in the weekend press, HMS Vengeance and her crew were successfully tested and certified as ready to rejoin the operational cycle. We do not comment on the detail of submarine operations.
The Secretary of State has advised us not to believe everything we read in the Sunday newspapers, but should we believe the White House official who, while we've been sitting here debating, has confirmed to CNN that the missile did auto self-destruct off the coast of Florida? And if that is the case, why is the British Parliament and the British public the last people to know?
As I've said, we do not in this House, nor has any previous government, given operational details of the demonstration and shakedown operation of one of our submarines conducting a test with one of our Trident missiles.
The Defence Committee took up the issue, inviting Lord West, who was once head of the Navy, to give evidence. He briefed MPs about nuclear missile tests and said finding out the details was easy if you knew who to ask.
First of all, we have to inform all of the aviators, civil airline people, because it's firing across the Atlantic. And also, we have an agreement that whenever we do these sort of firings, whether it's American firing, our firing, whoever, we warn Russia so they don't think we're starting World War III. So they're very well aware this is all going to happen.
We don't even know what date the test took place on, but I have heard a suggestion that it was on the 20th of June. Are you in a position to know whether that happened?
I absolutely don't know.
Okay.
I don't know the date of it, but I see no reason I personally can see no reason whatsoever not to do that. I can tell you we could go and I could probably phone up Mr. Putin. I did a favour of him once rescuing his submariners when they were drowning and ask him what it is, and I'm sure he'll tell me.
He'd probably give us a film of the launch as well.
Well, I don't know about that, but he certainly would be able to know the date.
Now let's take a look at what's been happening in the wider world of politics this week. Ben Butcher has our countdown.
Ed Miliband spoke for the first time in Prime Minister's Questions since he was at the dispatch box, and MPs were more than happy to welcome him back.
It brings back memories, actually.
What to give the man who has everything? Theresa May decides to gift President Trump with a traditional Scottish quake, a symbol of kinship and hospitality in the President's ancestral home. Michael Gove received a vote of confidence from Alistair Burt during Wednesday's Brexit committee when discussing the ups and downs of political life.
There's always a chance of revival, political life.
Speaker John Bercow was a victim of a mic gaffe on Monday when he accidentally offered advice to Defence Minister Michael Fallon on how to deal with committee chairs.
Pick a fight with the chairman of the select committee is a rather stupid thing to do.
And old habits die hard for retired speakers, it seems, as Baroness Brufroyd found herself using an old trick to calm the chamber.
Oh, my lords, Mike. Oh, my lord, order. Very good way to begin the week, I think.
We end with some worries about housekeeping. There are a host of problems with the Palace of Westminster. The plumbing fails regularly and the electrical system is faulty, increasing the likelihood of fires. And there's a lot of asbestos that needs removing. There are strongly held views on whether MPs should move out or stay while the work is carried out. Labour's Chris Bryant says the best and cheapest option is for everyone to leave.
Our predecessors got it hideously wrong in the 19th century. They kept on delaying necessary work, and that delay made the fire in 1834 not only possible, but inevitable. And so we lost the Painted Chamber, St Stephen's Chapel, and what was reputedly the most beautiful set of medieval buildings in the world. And then they insisted on staying on site whilst the new building was built around them, and constantly complained about the noise and the design. The result was long delays and a massive budget overrun.
But a Conservative, Sir Edward Lee, is on the Remain side.
As during the Second World War, the House of Commons debating chamber should at all times retain a presence in the Old Palace of Westminster. Now, it's known, and this was briefly alluded to by the Honourable Jennifer Ronda, that there is an alternative, expert, independent point of view, that instead of building what I would deem to be a folly, costing £85 million of a replica chamber in the courtyard of Richmond House, that we should, as in the war, use the House of Lords chamber.
What the two MPs do agree on, though, is that Parliament needs to make a decision as soon as possible. But the government hasn't set a date for debating an issue that's almost as controversial as whether to remain or leave the EU. And that's it from me for now. But do join Joanna Shin on Monday night at 11 for another roundup of the day at Westminster. But for now, from me, Christina Cooper, goodbye.